I heard my mother say it through the door. Offer him the beautiful one. She said it the way one might discuss which horse to present at auction, briskly, without sentiment, as though the matter had been settled long before the words left her mouth. And perhaps it had. 3 months of preparation, 3 months of new gowns, deportment lessons, French tutors brought in from London, and a dancing master who smelled of tobacco and made my sister Rosalind cry twice a week. 3 months of investment in the daughter who mattered. Nobody prepared me for anything. I was not supposed to be seen. I stood in the corridor outside the drawing room of our house in Cheapside, holding a tray of cordial glasses that cook had thrust into my hands because the parlour maid was ill and someone had to carry them. My dress was 3 seasons old, the hem let down twice and still too short. My hair was pinned back in a way that suggested function, not beauty. I was the mechanism of the household, the one who fetched, carried, managed, and disappeared. The Duke of Ashworth was in that room. I knew this because the entire house had been turned inside out for his arrival, because my mother had spoken of nothing else for weeks, because Rosalind had been sick with nerves since breakfast and had changed her gown 4 times, because a duke, a real duke, unmarried, 31, and in possession of 12,000 a year, did not visit houses like ours. Not unless someone had engineered it with the precision of a military campaign. My mother had engineered it. I pressed my back against the wall, the tray balanced on my palms, and I listened. "She plays beautifully," my mother was saying, her voice carrying the particular brightness she reserved for people she wanted something from. And her watercolours were remarked upon at Lady Fenton's exhibition last spring. "Rosalind, darling, stand near the window. The light catches your eyes so well there." The silence that followed had a quality to it, a weight. I could not see the Duke, but I could feel his presence through the wall. Or perhaps I only imagined it. The stillness of someone being performed at. The patience of someone who had been performed at many times before, and had learned to endure it the way one endures rain. I should have walked away. I should have taken the tray to the kitchen and stayed there, invisible, as I always was. Instead, I stepped into the doorway, not deliberately, not with intention. The door was ajar, and I moved toward it because the glasses needed to be set on the sideboard, and the sideboard was 3 steps inside the room. And I calculated, wrongly as it turned out, that I could manage it without being noticed. The Duke of Ashworth was standing near the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, his posture suggesting a man who had been examining the room's mediocre paintings with manufactured interest. He was tall, dark-haired. His face was striking in the way that certain faces are, not soft, not conventionally handsome, but arranged with a severity that made you look twice and then forget to look away. His jaw could have been cut from Portland stone. He was already turning, not toward Rosalind, who stood by the window in her ivory muslin, with her golden curls catching the afternoon light exactly as our mother had staged. Toward the doorway, toward me. Our eyes met, and the floor tilted beneath my feet. Not metaphorically. I actually stumbled, and one of the cordial glasses slid sideways on the tray with a sound like a small bell, and I caught it with fingers that had gone suddenly cold. He looked at me the way no one had ever looked at me, as though I were a question he had not expected to encounter, as though the room had rearranged itself around me and he was the only one who had noticed. "And who?" he said, his voice low, unhurried, directed not at me, but at my mother, with the precision of a man who understood exactly what he was disrupting, is this. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My mother's face performed a rapid series of calculations, none of them flattering to me. "That is my elder daughter, Your Grace, Eleanor. She was just—" "Leaving?" His eyebrow lifted a fraction. "That would be unfortunate." I stood in the doorway with a tray of cordial glasses, and a dress that didn't fit, and the absolute certainty that something had just happened that could not be undone. He was still looking at me. I should tell you what I knew about the Duke of Ashworth before that moment. It was not much. I knew what everyone knew, that he was wealthy, titled, and considered the most eligible man in England. I knew that his first wife had died 2 years prior, under circumstances people discussed only in whispers. I knew that he had retreated to his estate in Northumberland and had not been seen in society until this season, when he had reappeared without explanation and begun accepting invitations with a selectiveness that drove every ambitious mother in London to the edge of madness. I knew my mother was one of them. What I did not know, what I could not have known, standing in that doorway, was that his visit to our house was not the social call my mother believed it to be. He had come because he owed a debt to my father. A debt my father had concealed from us. A debt that, depending on how one interpreted it, meant the Duke of Ashworth already owned everything we had. But I would not learn that for another 11 days. He called again 3 days later. My mother was incandescent, not with joy, with fury. Because he had asked, through his secretary, whether Miss Eleanor Blackwood would be at home to receive visitors. Not Miss Rosalind, not the beautiful one. The other one. The one in the corridor with the tray. "You will not embarrass this family," my mother said to me that morning, her fingers digging into my arm hard enough to leave marks beneath my sleeve. "You will be polite. You will be dull. You will not make him laugh or engage him in conversation beyond what is required. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Mamma." "He is here for Rosalind. Whatever confusion occurred at his first visit, it will be corrected." I understood her perfectly. I had understood her my entire life. Rosalind was the investment. I was the overhead. The Duke arrived at precisely 2 o'clock. My mother had arranged the drawing room like a stage, Rosalind positioned at the pianoforte, a vase of fresh hothouse roses on the table, the good china laid out. I was placed in a chair near the far wall, with a piece of needlework I did not want and instructions to speak only when addressed. But the Duke of Ashworth did not follow the script my mother had written for him. He greeted Rosalind with appropriate courtesy. A bow, a compliment on her playing that was perfectly formed and perfectly empty. He accepted tea from my mother. He admired the roses. And then he turned his chair, physically turned it, the legs scraping against the floor with a sound that made my mother flinch, until it faced me. "Miss Blackwood," he said, "I understand you manage the household accounts." The room went very still. My mother's teacup hovered between the saucer and her lips. Rosalind's fingers paused on the keys. "I do, Your Grace," I said carefully. "How did you find the transition from your father's system of quarterly reconciliation to monthly?" I stared at him. The question was so specific, so precisely targeted that it could not have been casual. He knew something about our finances, something I had told no one. "I found it necessary," I said. "The quarterly system allowed errors to compound beyond correction." "Errors," he repeated. The words sat between us like a stone dropped into still water. "Yes, I imagine it did." My mother intervened with the desperation of a woman watching her careful plans unravel. Your Grace, Rosalind has prepared a new piece, a sonata by Mrs. Blackwood. His voice did not rise, but something in it shifted. A note of authority so natural it felt geological, like bedrock surfacing through topsoil. I am speaking with your daughter. He meant me, not Rosalind. The distinction landed in the room like a slap, and my mother's mouth opened, then closed, then pressed into a line so tight it disappeared. He turned back to me, and for the next 40 minutes, the Duke of Ashworth spoke to me about household management, estate accounting, the price of coal, the maintenance of tenant housing, and the particular challenges of managing income from land that had been poorly invested for a generation. He spoke to me as though I were a person. No one had ever done that before. Not like this. Not with genuine interest. Not with questions that required real answers. Not with the quiet intensity of a man who was listening, actually listening, to every word I said. His eyes never wandered to Rosalind. His attention never drifted. When I made a point about the false economy of deferring roof repairs, he leaned forward slightly, and I caught the scent of him, sandalwood and cold air, as though he had walked here through winter, despite the carriage waiting outside. It terrified me, not because he was frightening, but because the warmth spreading through my chest felt like something I could not afford. When he left, my mother did not speak to me for the rest of the day. Rosalind cried quietly in her room, and I sat in my chair by the far wall, with my untouched needlework, and the unmistakable, devastating knowledge that I was already in trouble. He came 4 more times over the following week. Each visit was shorter than the last. Each was more dangerous. On the second visit, we argued. It was absurd. A disagreement about tenant farming practices that began with polite difference and escalated, word by word, into something that made my mother grip the arm of her chair until her knuckles whitened. He said something about drainage that I knew to be incorrect. I had read Sinclair's agricultural reports cover to cover, and instead of deferring, as every rule of my station demanded, I told him he was wrong. The silence was catastrophic. His face went very still. His eyes, grey, the colour of winter sky, held mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. And then, slowly, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something more private than that. Something that felt like recognition. "You're right," he said. "I was wrong." A duke does not say that. Not to a woman of no rank, no fortune, and no beauty worth mentioning. The words hung in the air like something sacred and profane at once, and I felt them land in my chest like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known was there. On the 4th visit, he brought a book, Sinclair's Reports, a first edition, leather-bound, with annotations in the margins in a hand I did not recognize. He placed it on the table beside me as though it were nothing, as though men brought women agricultural treatises every day, as though this were not the most intimate gift anyone had ever given me. "For the drainage argument," he said, "I thought you should have the evidence to hold over me properly." My fingers touched the spine. The leather was warm from where he had carried it inside his coat. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Ashworth," he said. I looked up. His face was closer than I had realized, close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight unevenness of his breath, the way his gaze dropped, just for a fraction of a second, to my mouth. "I beg your pardon?" "When we argue about drainage, I think we can dispense with Your Grace. My name is sufficient." It was not sufficient. It was seismic. The shift from formal address to his title name was an intimacy that my mother, had she been paying attention instead of whispering furiously to Rosalind in the next room, would have recognized immediately as the sound of her plans collapsing. Ashworth, I said, testing the shape of it. Something moved behind his eyes, something raw and hungry and immediately controlled. Yes, he said quietly, like that. On the 11th day, I found the letter. I was reconciling the household accounts. My father had been dead for 2 years, and the debts he left behind were a labyrinth I navigated weekly with diminishing hope. The letter was tucked inside a ledger I had not opened in months, folded into a small square, written in my father's hand. I read it once. Then I read it again. Then I sat at my father's desk for a very long time, while the room went dark around me. The letter was addressed to the Duke of Ashworth. It was a confession. My father had borrowed against our house, our land, and every asset we possessed. Not from a bank, but from the Ashworth estate directly, through a private arrangement made years before. The debt was vast, unpayable, and the terms my father had agreed to, in desperation, included a clause I had to read 3 times before I understood it. In the event of default, the Duke was entitled to claim any asset of the Blackwood family. Any asset, including, in the specific legal language my father had signed without telling anyone, the right of first refusal on any marital arrangement for his daughters. My mother's campaign to win the Duke for Rosalind took on a new and nauseating meaning. She knew. She had to know. This was not ambition. It was debt collection dressed in ivory muslin. And the Duke who had turned his chair to face me, who had argued about drainage, who had brought me a book, who had asked me to use his name, the Duke knew too. He had always known. Every conversation, every visit, every look that had made me feel seen for the first time in my life. It was all part of a calculation. He had come to inspect the inventory, and he had chosen, not the beautiful one, the useful one. I did not cry. I had learned long ago that crying was an indulgence reserved for girls whose tears produced results. Mine never had. I waited until his next visit, the following afternoon, and I met him at the door before my mother could intervene. His expression shifted when he saw my face, and for one fractured second, I saw something in his eyes that looked very much like alarm. "Miss Blackwood." "The study," I said. "Now." I turned and walked down the corridor without waiting to see if he followed. He followed. His footsteps behind me were measured, deliberate, the stride of a man who understood that something had changed and was choosing to walk toward it rather than away. I closed the study door behind us. We were alone, unchaperoned. If anyone discovered us, the scandal would be immediate and irreversible. I did not care. I placed my father's letter on the desk between us. His eyes went to it, and I watched his face. Watched the recognition, the flicker of something that might have been guilt, the careful reconstruction of his expression into neutrality. "You knew," I said. My voice was steady. I had rehearsed this. "From the beginning, before your first visit, you knew about the debt, the clause, all of it. You came to this house to collect." He did not deny it. Yes. The word was quiet, simple. It fell between us like a blade. "And the conversations," I continued, my hands trembling at my sides despite every effort to still them. "The arguments, the book, looking at me like—" My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. Was any of it real? The silence stretched. His jaw tightened. I could see the muscles working beneath the skin, the rigid control of a man who kept everything locked behind walls that had been built for precisely this kind of moment. "The debt is real," he said. "The clause is real. I came to your home because your father's obligations gave me legal cause to do so." A pause. His voice dropped. Everything else was a catastrophe I did not plan for. "What does that mean?" "It means I came to settle an account, and instead He stopped. His hand closed into a fist at his side. "It means I have handled this badly." "Badly?" I repeated. "You let me believe—" "I let you believe what? That someone found you interesting? That someone valued your mind? That someone saw you?" His control slipped, just for a moment, just enough for his voice to roughen at the edges. "Those things were not deception, Miss Blackwood. They were the truth that made the rest of it unconscionable." I stared at him. My chest ached with something I could not name. Fury and grief, and the desperate, pathetic hope that he meant what he was saying, tangled together until I could not separate them. "I want to forgive the debt," he said. "What?" "I want to forgive it. Entirely. I have wanted to since my second visit to this house. But the legal complications—" "You cannot forgive a debt of this size without consideration. Any solicitor would challenge it. My mother would—" I stopped. Understanding arrived like cold water. "My mother would use it. She would claim you forgave the debt as a form of courtship, and she would leverage it to force an arrangement with Rosalind." His silence confirmed it. "That is why you kept coming back," I said slowly. "Not to collect. To find a way to release us without my mother turning it into a different kind of chain." "Your mother is a formidable strategist." "My mother is a desperate woman, selling her daughters to survive." I heard the bitterness in my own voice and did not soften it. "The difference is that Rosalind doesn't know she's being sold." "I have always known." Something broke in his expression. The stone facade cracked, and underneath it I saw, just for a breath, a man who was furious and heartbroken and lost. "Eleanor." My name. My first name. In his voice. In this room. The air between us changed, charged, dangerous. "Don't," I whispered. "If you say my name like that, I will believe you mean something by it, and I cannot afford to believe that." "I mean everything by it." He stepped closer. One step. The distance between us halved, and I could feel the heat of his body, could smell sandalwood and winter air, could see the uneven rise of his chest. "I came to settle a debt," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I stayed because you argued with me about drainage, and you were right. I kept returning because every room I enter that does not contain you feels like a room with insufficient air. I have managed estates, survived a marriage that nearly destroyed me, buried my wife, and rebuilt myself from the wreckage, and none of it, frightened me the way you frighten me." My hands were shaking. My entire body was shaking. "This is impossible," I said. "Yes." "The debt, my mother, the difference in our stations. All real, all obstacles, none of them sufficient to make me stop." His hand lifted, slowly, giving me time to step back, to refuse, to be wise. His fingers touched my jaw, barely. the lightest possible contact, and I felt it like fire through every nerve in my body. I did not step back. "Tell me to leave," he said. "Tell me this is unwanted, and I will forgive the debt and walk out of your life, and you will never see me again." I could not speak. My throat had closed. His thumb traced my cheekbone, feather-light, and my eyes burned with tears I refused to shed. "Tell me to leave, Eleanor." "I can't." His breath shuddered. His forehead came to rest against mine. We stood like that, touching and not touching, breathing the same air, balanced on the edge of something that would ruin us both if it fell the wrong way. Then the door opened. My mother stood in the doorway. Her face went white, then red, then a shade I had never seen before. The color of a woman watching her most ambitious plan succeed in entirely the wrong way. "What?" she said, her voice trembling with controlled fury, "is happening in this room?" What followed was war. My mother moved with the ruthless efficiency I had always known she possessed, but had never seen deployed at full force. Within hours, she had sent word to Lady Ashton, the Duke's aunt, describing what she had witnessed. Within 2 days, the whispers had begun. Within 4, Rosalind had been sent to our aunt in Bath, with instructions to weep publicly about her sister's betrayal. I was confined to the house. My mother would not speak to me except to deliver instructions. The Sinclair book, Ashworth's gift, disappeared from my room. I searched for it everywhere, frantic, irrational, knowing it was just a book and feeling its absence like a wound. "You have stolen your sister's future," my mother told me, standing in the doorway of my bedchamber on the 5th evening. Her voice was ice. The Duke was meant for Rosalind. Every advantage, every opportunity, every penny spent on this season, wasted. Because you could not keep yourself invisible for one afternoon. He was never interested in Rosalind. He would have been, given time, given proper management. He is not a horse to be managed, Mama. Her hand connected with my cheek. Not hard. My mother's cruelties were rarely physical. But the shock of it silenced us both. "You will refuse him," she said. "If he offers, and I do not believe he will once Lady Ashton speaks to him, you will refuse. For Rosalind. For this family." She left. I pressed my hand to my cheek, which barely stung, and stared at the empty shelf where the book had been. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark and listened to the house creak and settle around me, and tried to imagine 2 futures. One, where I did as my mother asked and disappeared back into the walls of this house, and one where I didn't. The first was safe. The second was terrifying. I had been invisible my whole life. The prospect of being seen, truly, permanently seen, was more frightening than anything my mother could do. Lady Ashton came on the 7th day. She arrived in a carriage that cost more than our house, with a spine of iron and eyes that assessed me the way one assesses a crack in load-bearing masonry. "So," she said, settling into a chair in our drawing room with the authority of a woman who had never been refused anything. "You are the girl who has disrupted my nephew's plans." "I was not aware he had plans to disrupt, my lady." "He had plans to settle your father's debt quietly, marry no one, and return to Northumberland to continue his impressive project of drinking himself into an early grave." She paused. "You have disrupted that last item most thoroughly, and for that, I am inclined to tolerate you." I stared at her. My nephew's first wife was a woman of exceptional beauty and no substance whatsoever, Lady Ashton continued, as though discussing weather. She was decorative, agreeable, and completely incapable of withstanding the pressures of his position. She wilted, and when she died, of a fever, Miss Blackwood, despite what the gossips suggest, he blamed himself for having chosen beauty over backbone. Her eyes met mine, sharp as flint. He will not make that mistake twice. Your mother is a tiresome woman with considerable tactical instincts and no strategic vision whatsoever. She will be managed. Lady Ashton rose. The question is not whether your mother approves. The question is whether you are strong enough for what comes next. She left without waiting for an answer. That evening, a package arrived at the kitchen door, delivered by a footman in Ashworth livery. Inside was the Sinclair book. Recovered, I would later learn, because the Duke had sent a man to inquire at every bookshop in London before Lady Ashton informed him that my mother had simply hidden it in the linen cupboard. Tucked inside the front cover was a note in his handwriting. "I believe this belongs to you, as I am increasingly certain, do I." I held the book against my chest, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. He came at noon the following day, not to the drawing room, not through the front door, to the garden gate, where he knew I walked at midday because I had mentioned it once, during our conversation about estate management and daily routines. He was standing on the other side of the gate when I came around the corner of the house. The iron bars between us cast striped shadows across his face. He looked as though he had not slept in days. He looked devastating. "Your mother has written to my solicitor," he said without preamble. "She is threatening to publish the details of your father's debt unless I agree to court Rosalind." My blood went cold. She wouldn't. She would. The publication would ruin your family's reputation. But she calculates, correctly, that the scandal would damage me as well. A duke collecting debts from a dead man's family is not a sympathetic figure. "What will you do?" "I have already done it. I have had the debt formally forgiven through a third-party solicitor, structured as a charitable settlement in your father's name. The paperwork is filed. Your mother has nothing left to threaten me with." I gripped the iron bars of the gate. "That is a fortune. You cannot simply—" "I can. I have. It is done." His hands came up to cover mine on the bars. His fingers were warm. "Eleanor, I have spent 7 days in absolute misery, which I am told is roughly appropriate for the realization that one has fallen completely and irreversibly in love with a woman who argued with him about drainage on their second meeting." A sound escaped me, half laugh, half sob. "I am not asking you to defy your mother for my sake," he said. "I am asking you to choose, for your own sake, whether you would like to spend your life being invisible or whether you would like to be seen." His hands tightened on mine. "I see you, Eleanor. I see you, and I cannot stop, and I do not wish to." The gate was between us. Iron and rust and propriety, and every rule that said a woman like me did not get a man like him. I opened the gate. It swung inward with a sound like a held breath finally released, and I stepped through, and his arms came around me, and his mouth found mine, and the kiss was exactly what it should have been. Not gentle, not careful, not polite. It was the release of something held so tight and so long that letting it go felt like falling and flying at the same time. When we broke apart, his forehead rested against mine, and I could feel his heart hammering against my palms, where my hands pressed flat against his chest. "Your mother is watching from the upstairs window," he murmured. "I know. She looks murderous. She will survive." He laughed, a real laugh, low and warm and startled, the laugh of a man who had forgotten he could, and I felt it resonate through my bones like church bells ringing after years of silence. The scandal, when it came, was quieter than I expected. Lady Ashton, true to her word, managed it. The story that circulated through London's drawing rooms was carefully shaped. A duke who had generously forgiven a dead man's debts. A quiet elder daughter who had caught his eye through intelligence rather than beauty. A mother who had graciously supported the match once she understood its sincerity. It was not the truth, but it was a version of the truth that allowed everyone to save face. And in society, that is all that matters. My mother did not speak to me for 3 weeks. When she finally did, it was to ask whether the Duke's estate in Northumberland had adequate guest chambers. Rosalind wrote from Bath. Her letter was cautious, bruised, but not unkind. She asked if I was happy. I wrote back and told her the truth. I was terrified and hopeful, and more awake than I had ever been in my life. She wrote again to say she had met a captain of the Navy at an assembly. He was not a duke. He had kind eyes. I wrote back to tell her that kind eyes were worth more than any title in England. We married in October, in the chapel at Ashworth Hall, with frost on the ground and a sky the colour of pewter. Lady Ashton sat in the front pew and did not cry, which I suspected was the highest expression of approval she was capable of. Afterward, in the library, a vast, cold, beautiful room that I had already begun to think of as mine, I found the Sinclair book on the desk. He had placed it there. Beside it was a second volume, a blank ledger, leather-bound, with my initials stamped in gold on the cover. "For the household accounts," he said from the doorway. I ran my fingers over the embossed letters. E.B., soon to be E.A., rendered in gold on dark leather. A practical gift, an intimate one. "You are going to let me manage the accounts?" I said. "I am going to beg you to manage the accounts. The steward has been robbing me for a decade, and I suspect you will catch him within a fortnight." A week. A week. That not quite smile again, the one that was only ever for me. I have no doubt. He crossed the room. His hand found the back of my neck, warm against my skin, and he pulled me toward him with a gentleness that undid me more completely than force ever could. "I came to settle a debt," he said against my mouth, "and instead I found you standing in a hallway with a tray of cordial glasses, and everything I thought I knew about what I wanted became irrelevant." "I was not supposed to be seen," I whispered. "No," he said. "You were supposed to be found." The book sat on the desk between the ledger and the lamp. Its spine was creased from use. Its margins were filled with my notes now, layered over the original annotations. 2 sets of handwriting tangled together on the same pages. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall over Ashworth Hall, and the library was warm, and I was not invisible. And I was home.